I'd like to thank everybody for joining the webinar this morning. We appreciate all of your time. This webinar is to guide you through some of the work we're doing and some of our thoughts around AI readiness, some of the things that we're seeing in the sectors that we're working on, and essentially how you can prepare your organisation to start leveraging some of the AI technologies that are available. So we'll talk about how you can help to kind of build the foundations for both secure, scalable, and successful AI adoption. And we'll talk about some of the core areas that will help you to achieve that. In terms of how the next 35 minutes will work, so this is a kind of quite a focused 35-minute session with time for your questions at the end. So there'll be a Q&A. Feel free to pop questions in the chat as we go along, and we'll do our best to answer those questions at the end. This session is built for decision makers, so there's not a requirement here to have an engineering background or developer background. This is more at the kind of foundational level and is a business first led webinar. And then in terms of questions, please kind of feel free to ask anything. Drop the questions in the chat as we go, as I've just said, and we'll do our best to cover them at the end. Also, feel free to pop yourselves off mute at any point during the session if there's some questions that you'd like to ask of kind of specific things that we're talking about. In terms of who's talking through this today, so it would be myself, Will Proud. I'm Client Growth Manager here at the 848 Group, so helping organisations to turn some of this AI readiness into an actual practical and funded plan that we can action. I've got my colleague Jeff Abram, who's our head of consulting here at 848. Jeff leads our AI readiness and technology strategy for 848 clients, amongst other work streams that we've got going as well. You can move me on there, Jeff. Thank you. So in terms of the AI conversation then, so kind of get into the meat of it now. So it's obviously a big hot topic across lots of industry and kind of and lots of roles at the moment. Everybody's kind of experimenting with AI and looking at how it can apply to their business. But the big key differentiator that we're seeing is now about readiness. And how ready is your organisation to actually safely, securely, and successfully adopt some of these AI technologies that are out there? And this is kind of the core focus of the session today. Is the question has kind of changed from should we use AI, and has changed now to are we actually ready to use AI? So I'll hand over to Jeff, who's going to step through a few slides and talk about that in a bit more detail. And again, feel free to pop your questions in the chat as we go. Jeff, I'll hand over to you, mate, if you don't mind.
Yeah, thanks, Will. Hi, everyone. Good to be with you all. So, I mean, I'll start with the sort of single most important idea of this whole session. As I say, it's there on the screen. So, AI is no longer new. Think about how much it's changed in the last 18 months, for example. Copilot, it's built into Microsoft 365. Every vendor you work with now has AI-powered something somewhere on the website. And your own people are almost certainly using AI tools already, whether you guys, have sanctioned it or not. So, the question's quietly changed. It used to be, should we use AI? A strategy question. Now it's more practical and frankly more, an uncomfortable one. Are we ready to use it? And are we ready to use it well? Because the organizations pulling ahead aren't the ones with the fanciest tools, they're the ones who've got the foundations right. And that's sort of what we're going to unpack with you today, really. So, first of all, some reassurance wherever you are on this journey, you're not alone and probably more normal than you think. In our experience, most organizations sit in one of three places. Some of you are exploring, so curious, building maybe a business case to get sign off on some funding, some licenses, or some the business versions of ready use tools like Gemini and ChatGPT and so on and so forth. Might be running a few small experiments to see what all the fuss is about. If that's where you're at, it's quite early on the journey, but it's a perfectly good place to be. There's nothing wrong with still being at that point, not at all. So, next stage that some of you are going to be at. So, some of you will be piloting. You've already got, approval for the use of the tools. You've got tools implemented into the organization, whether that's, Copilot or one of the other sort of non-Microsoft tools just talked about. You might be having some early use cases live, things like maybe Copilot for a group of users. You might have a customer-facing chatbot, perhaps that's a bit more advanced. Some automation in the back office where you're, things you were manually cranking before, you've got AI sort of speeding it up for you. And some of you might already be scaling that sort of stuff and rolling AI across entire teams, starting to see real value, real measurable value. And is the interesting part. It doesn't really matter which one of those three areas you're in there, because they all tend to hit the same wall, and that wall's, it's not normally about the technology. A quick gut check for you all. Which stage are you all at? Where do you think you are on that journey? Are you exploring, piloting, or scaling? I'm sure you can plot yourself on that map somewhere. Like I was saying, it's not about the tools. So what's that war? The uncomfortable truth is, the heart of today's session, success of AI depends far less on the tools and more on the foundations underneath them. The tools are the easy bit, honestly. You can buy them, you can switch them on, you can access them via your web browser, via your phone, via whatever device you've got. You can roll them out within an afternoon. It's not a huge IT project to get those tools out there. What actually determines whether AI is safe and whether it's valuable is everything sitting underneath those tools that you're unleashing on your business. The quality of your data, who owns the decisions, how is your security set up, whether you've thought about compliance, whether your people are even ready to use AI yet, do they know what they're doing when they're using it. You need to get those right, because even the modest tools out there deliver enormous value, but get them wrong, and even the most advanced AI in the world will confidently amplify your worst problems. So the next 15 minutes or so, we're going to talk about these foundations, because that's where readiness is really won or lost. It's not the choice of tools. It's making sure your environment is ready to sort of lay those tools over the top of everything. So, we talk about common pitfalls. Before we get to the foundations, I'll show you what getting it wrong actually looks like. There are 4 things that we see tripping organizations up again and again at every stage. The first stage is messy data, information that's scattered across systems, duplicated, it's contradictory, it's out of date. When AI reaches into that, it doesn't magically clean it up. It doesn't know why you've got that data there, why it's duplicated, what the latest version is. It just serves you back with total confidence. The one thing I would say about AI tools is they don't hesitate to give you the wrong answer. If you've got 2 of something and one of them's an old version, it doesn't know. It just goes, that's the version I think's the latest. It doesn't tell you even that it's found 2 versions, just gives you the answer, and that can cause problems. The second is what we call shadow AI. All of your people within your organizations are all going to be using AI. They're going to be using public AI tools to get their jobs done. Whether you've released, governed AI tools into your organization, they'll be using ChatGPT on the phone, they'll be using Gemini on the phone, et cetera, et cetera. That's what that's what's called shadow AI. They're going to be pasting customer data, potentially customer contracts, board papers, all sorts into this public AI potentially with no oversight, no policies. They're not doing it to deliberately throw your organizations under a bus or cause a problem, but they don't realize when they're putting that data in there, it's usually well intentioned, but it's unusually invisible until something does go wrong. I've heard examples of people putting company financial data into public chat models, and whilst they don't know they're doing anything wrong, actually what you're doing is you're giving all that information for those models to train on and potentially expose all that data to someone who asks a question about your organization. It's probably a worst case scenario. Third is oversharing. This is the one that catches everyone out. Over the years, files, whole sites within your organization, if it's Microsoft 365 and SharePoint sites, OneDrives, all get shared, and they all get shared far more widely than anyone intended. There's everyone has always been to that. Oh, we need a few people to access this stuff, and someone will say, do you know what, just open up to everyone for now, and we'll lock it back down later. Never gets locked back down, and this continually builds up for years and years and years. So there's stuff being shared with people across the organization that they don't even know is shared with them currently. And the fourth is no guardrails. No agreed view of what's acceptable. Crucially, no one clearly accountable when the decision needs to be made about how to use AI, what tools to use, what not to use, what context to use. They're every day, and everyday decisions. Everyone maps directly onto a foundation we talk about and what we've walked through there. So let's move on to the 5 foundations. So here's the backbone of the whole session. There's 5 foundations of AI readiness that we focus on at 848. That's data, governance, security, and compliance and people. If you get these 5 right, and you're ready, let's take it, let's take one at a time, and we'll keep them all practical, keep them. This should all resonate with you. The first one we're looking at is obviously foundation one's data. Single question to ask yourself is your data or our data collectively fit for purpose? Because AI is only as good as the information it's built on. It's not a new phrase, that it's an old phrase. In our world, garbage in, garbage out. AI just makes it faster and far more convincing that the garbage you've got in is pushing the garbage out. The three things that matter in your data is quality. Is your information accurate, current, something you trust a decision on? Not a price list from 3 years ago. What's the structure like and the access? Is it findable? Is it well organized, or is it buried in silos, in boxes, someone's personal drive? And then you've got sprawl. Do you genuinely know what data you hold, where it lives, who can get into it? You don't need perfect data to start with AI. Nobody has got perfect data. No one will ever have perfect data because it's ever changing all the time. You can make your data perfect one day. Within 5 minutes, someone's changed something. It's not perfect anymore. But you do need to know the state of it, because that's what tells you what AI can safely touch today and what needs to work first. Foundation 2 is governance. And the question here is simply who owns AI in your organization. Now, governance can sound like committees. It can sound like red tape. Things that slow everything down. That's not what I mean here. What I mean is clarity. Three things. Ownership. Is there a clear person or a group of accountable AI decisions and their outcomes? Not a vague IT will handle it, but a real owner. Policies. Do you have simple rules for how AI tools get chosen, used, reviewed? And decision making, is there a consistent way to say yes, no, not yet, to a new AI idea, rather than it being a gut feel on whether it might or might not work? Rather than whoever shouts the loudest, you'll find all your techies will be, we need this AI to sort our world out, and so just get on with it. But there needs to be someone governing all of that. Without all of this governance, AI decisions get made ad hoc all over the organization, nobody joining the dots. Good governance isn't red tape. It's the thing that lets you move more quickly, but more importantly, more safely at that time. Foundation 3, security and access. If there's one thing you take away from today, I'd say it's got to be this one. Here's the key idea. When you switch on AI, particularly something like Microsoft Copilot, it sees exactly what your people can see. It inherits every permission you already have. It doesn't break your security. It reveals it. So think about what this means. Permission sprawl. We touched on that a minute ago. Years of just give them access, quietly adding up until people can reach far more than anyone remembers granting. Oversharing sites, files open more widely than you ever intended. And then what AI surfaces, because if sensitive document is technically open to someone, AI will happily and instantly serve it up if they ask it a question. If you think about traditional ways, if someone's got access to something they didn't know they got access to, they usually have to go looking for it, and chances of them ever doing that are pretty slim. Now you ask AI the question, it will go and find you the answer from the information you've got available. Worst case scenarios we see around this, HR have got a list of everyone's salaries in the organization that for some strange reason have inadvertently shared with everyone via OneDrive at one point. I asked a question to the AI, what's the current salary banding for a CEO within the industry I work in? It'll not only tell me that from the information on the internet, it'll go and find that salary list that I've got access to and tell me what our current CEO earns if his name is on there. That's, or it's catastrophic. You can't come back from that sort of data leak. Now, this is the number one reason why we see Copilot rollouts stalled or get pulled. Someone in finance, like say, asked that innocent question, AI surfaces, salary spreadsheet, redundancy plan, because it was quietly shared 3 years ago. AI didn't do anything wrong. It just held up mirror. The good thing is, the good news is it's knowable and fixable. In a few minutes or so, we'll show you exactly how we can make it all visible. Foundation 4 is, compliance and responsible use. So the mindset here is move fast, absolutely, but only as fast as you can stand behind. 3 things to keep in view: regulation. So UK GDPR is not a new thing. Data Protection Act's not a new thing. They've not gone anywhere. If you're feeding personal data into an AI tool, the same rules are going to apply as always. And if you're trading, in Europe, you've got the EU AI Act is now on the horizon. Acceptable use, clear, simple AI policy that your people actually understand and can follow. 1 page, just giving them some guidance on what they should be doing, not 50-page, huge document. No one's going to read that. No one's going to read it, not going to understand it, so they're not going to abide by it. And then transparency, being able to explain how a decision was made and keeping a human in the loop. Human in the loop, you hear people talking about all the time. It's absolutely critical, the use of an AI tool. And some of the rules I stick to is, Don't use AI for something you're not a domain expert in to produce you an outcome. You'll just get yourself into trouble and you lose your credibility. And anything it does produce, review it yourself. Don't ever send anything out without reviewing it. You need to make sure you're cool with what's being sent out. So once it's gone, that's it. Then it's fact. It's not about being a department of no. Responsible use is what protects your brand, your customers, and your license to keep scaling. It's like, if you like, it's a seatbelt that's going to let you drive faster, not the handbrake to stop you driving. Foundation 5 are your people, the one that everyone forgets. You can get the data, the governance, security, and the compliance all right and still fail here because best tools in the world do nothing if your people don't trust them or don't use them. 3 things: literacy, everyday confidence across your teams about what AI can do, just as importantly, what it can't. Adoption, making AI genuinely useful inside real workflows, not a shiny novelty that gets used once or twice and forgotten. People use it like a search engine, ask it a question, get an answer, walk away. That's not the way to be encouraging your team to get the best out of AI. The change, bringing in the change, bringing people with you, communicating clearly what the capabilities are, training people properly, and then not just training them, supporting them through the use of it as the tools develop, making sure people are educated on the developments in those tools. People are the multiplier. Technology readiness without people just stalls. So when you're planning your AI investments, spend as much energy on the humans as you do on the licenses. That there brings the conclusion on the 5, which raises the next natural question in the process, which is how do you know where you stand? Do you know where you really are? So the 5 foundations: data governance, security, compliance, and people, which raises the honest question on the screen: how ready are you really? In our experience, most teams genuinely don't know until they look. You might feel strong on data, but you've got no idea how exposed your security is. Completely normal. The point isn't to feel bad about it. It's to find out, where you're at, and that's exactly where a readiness check, sort of a governance blueprint comes in. And I can show you how we're approaching it at 848. So we've, based on our experience of working with our clients and fail fast and all that sort of stuff, we've come together with an AI governance and AI blueprint. This is our structured, jargon-free health check, if you like, across all 5 foundations we've just walked through. And it's not just the walkthrough. Importantly, out the back of it, you come out of it with a clear plan, not just a score out of 10 about how well we, subjectively think you're doing it. It works in 4 steps. The first step is we understand the scope of what you need to be included as part of the process. Where is your data hosted? Is it all in Microsoft 365? Is it a mixture of different data sources? Who are your main stakeholders in that AI journey? Who's trying to drive it forward? Who are the blockers? Who are the power users? That sort of stuff. Which people do we need to be aware of? Where have you got any concerns already? Around data sources, security, duplication, processes. What you're already aware of, you might already be concerned about. Once we've got a good view then of the scope of what we're looking at, it's then about reviewing all those areas, looking at all those areas of focus individually against what we consider to be our AI readiness criteria. We'll assess you against foundations of our AI blueprint and getting on it, give you an honest, objective picture of where you're strong and where you're exposed. And thirdly, we can give you all the technical details, but it don't really mean much to people. So we'll translate all of our findings into straightforward business language that everyone can understand. No matter what your area of focus is in the business, it'll give information that really understands and matters, and where the real risk sits in the organization. I mean, there's a huge financial decision around AI tooling and licensing. So these often sat with, the CFO, head of finance, whatever it's going to be. If you go to them with a load of technology outputs that doesn't make any sense to them, you need to go and tell them, how this is going to the return on investment in your business, why you need to invest in the money in the business now to get all of your foundations straight before you implement AI, and what the risk of not doing that is. And the final piece in the puzzle then is like I say, is that outcome, which is a series of recommended steps. So not only do we tell you where your areas of focus need to be and what needs to be sorted in your organization, but a set of recommended steps to remediate all of that. what those key issues are, the risks that can impact your chance of deploying AI successfully, and how you remediate all those. The outcome we care about is clarity. We want you to walk away from any time you've worked with us on this blueprint to know exactly where you stand and what to do next. For most people on this call, honestly, it's the single most valuable next step you could take. I mentioned finding out, where you are and what that looks like for your world. Now, I mean, what I'll do is I can take you how that security piece looks real. So let me just flip over. So we partner with an organization called ShareGate. You may well have heard of them. They traditionally known for their migration tools, SharePoint migration tools originally, and now more widely Microsoft 365 migration tools and migrating content from other applications like Box and stuff like that, and Google Workspace into SharePoint and Office 365. But what they've been doing over recent years is building up a set of governance tools. You remember that foundation tree we talked about where AI sees whatever your people can see. Well, this is where we turn that from guesswork into hard evidence using one of ShareGate's tools called ShareGate Protect. What that does is that lets us look at your Microsoft 365 permissions, make them visible to the tool, and looking at all of the content, permissions across that content, governance across that content to see, who can actually see what right across your tenant instead of guessing. It finds oversharing, it surfaces exposed sites, it shows up sensitive files, things that have been overshared for years, and it'll let us know what needs cleaning up, showing us how to fix those issues before you switch on AI, and not finding out afterwards after you switch on AI and get all these problems. So instead of me telling you, I can come in and have a look at your environment and say, based on what you're telling me, I think you might have an oversharing problem. With the use of these tools, it's fact. We can show you a report of exactly what Copilot can show up if you don't make any changes to your environment in terms of that oversharing, governance, and security. Tidying all this up before it go live is the difference between hoping you're ready and knowing you are. And looking at a realistic roadmap for all of this. So what does good actually look like from here? So, a realistic roadmap in the shorthand of it is like, crawl, walk, run. It's a familiar set of terms. It's from everything from, growing up to everything else you implement, anything, crawling before you're walking, before you run. Crawling here is going to be, fixing those foundations, sorting your data, your permissions, your basic policies, unglamorous, but it's what everything else stands on. Walk is the piloting safely, picking one contained high value use case and proving it works, putting the guardrails in place and making that, it still works. It doesn't slow the process down, actually improves what you're trying to do. And then run is, once you know it all works, is scaling that with confidence, rolling out more widely with governance and proper measurement. So, the value it's actually delivering. The mistake we see, is organizations trying to sprint straight to run before they can crawl. You don't need to fix everything at once. You just need the right order. And say that's everything I've got to present to you guys today. I'm going to hand you back over to Will.
Yeah, thanks for that, Jeff. Some really useful insight there, and kind of ties into all of the kind of conversations and engagements that we're having with our client base and seeing in the industry. So we kind of wanted to move it forwards and give everyone on the call today a few actionable steps that you can either engage internally and start to do yourselves, or kind of obviously engage 848 or another partner to actually support you with that. So some actionable things, and ties into the work that Jeff's just talked around there, is kind of looking before you leap. So take some time to review your access, oversharing, and understand kind of what access and oversharing you do have across your environment, and kind of what data is sitting where. We would suggest and recommend strongly that you start to think about writing an AI policy. This doesn't need to be war and peace, but just a one-page document that is a kind of acceptable AI use document that everyone across the business can understand and use to inform their AI usage. And it's also a good idea to look across your organization and identify one specific use case that AI can drive some value and provide value safely, and then use that to deliver value and kind of build on that momentum. So again, ties into the stuff Jeff was talking around there before, around crawling and walking before you can run. So we'd strongly suggest that you kind of look at one specific use case, deliver value, and then kind of move forwards from there. Again, just to go a little bit deeper on that is some kind of 5 actionable things that you can do this week. Again, just kind of talks to some of those points there, is kind of see what our AI can already see. So again, talks to some of the data governance, data access, have a look at what your kind of AI can see, what it has access to, where your data is stored, etc. Identify some of your biggest oversharing risks, so things sitting within SharePoint, OneDrive, Teams, and understand what's overshared and who has permissions and access to what. Again, we'd suggest to draft a 1-page AI acceptable use policy. And if any of you guys do go ahead with that, then please feel free to share that with myself and Jeff, and we'd be happy to look over it and let you know if it's the right kind of approach. Again, choose one safe, valuable use case to pilot with AI, and understand what that looks like and what the business outcome is that you're trying to achieve. And then obviously we've got as Jeff talked about there, a bit of a quick start engagement to support you with all of those things if it's something that you wanted to lean on a partner for, which is kind of booking our 848 governance and AI blueprint, which again Jeff talked about, but that will provide you with a clear roadmap and blueprint on where you sit across all of those 5 core AI readiness pillars that Jeff talked about earlier. Again, and we appreciate everyone taking the time out of their day this morning to join us here. So we wanted to offer you that AI assessment and the governance and AI blueprint at a 20% discount, limited today. So again, I think if that's anything that any of you guys wanted to pick up, then we can look at engaging in conversations after the call. But we wanted to provide you with a bit of an offer to kind of thank you for joining us today, and we can pick up conversations on that moving forwards. That's all I had to say. Again, thank you, Jeff, for all of the insight you've provided there, and thank you all for joining the session this morning, and take it easy. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for your time, everyone.